Guys, it's KY Not Kinda Creative, and today I'm going to step out of my comfort zone a little bit. I've been known to be a fitness shooter, shooting things like bodybuilding and apparently CrossFit now as of recently, but I've been known to do a lot of things in the fitness space. Now, I had been called up to do a shoot for a fashion company, particularly jewelry, by my friend Sid, and we decided that we were going to go to the mint room, get there for a couple hours, and we're also working with the photographer Emma as well, so I was going to shoot a fashion kind of jewelry video. Now, I'm not done this edit yet, I'm pretty much on the last parts of it, but I wanted to break down some of the techniques and how I did some of the shots in this video. Of all, you guys are going to ask about it. You're going to want to know what gear did we actually use. So of course I'm using the Sony FX3, and I was using two lenses for that particular shoot. Most of the things that I was shooting on was on the 35mm lens, but I did use some 85 handheld shots as well. It's also one of the few times I'll use my Ronin RS2 gimbal. I'm not a big gimbal person. I don't like using gimbals and stabilizers. I really like the handheld field, but I also think that's because I like fitness videos and things like that, so I normally shoot handheld. Now, if you notice that the image on there looks like there's a Promus filter, you're half right. I actually use the Dream filter from Prism Lens Effects, which is the 4x6 like matte box filter, which is why there's a matte box on there as well. Even though we're in the mint room, which has really good natural light, the sun kept changing. I'll talk about that in some things I'd like to change for this video, but the lighting I actually used for the most part was the Aperture 300D on a 6x6 diffusion scrim. Now, the Aperture 300D is a light you're familiar with. You guys have heard about the 120D or aperture lights in that realm, but something I wanted to do is I wanted to shine it through a giant scrim. It gives you a wide, nice, big diffusion, so it doesn't just give you a concentrated beam, which a smaller dish would do. Having a 6x6 diffusion means that you can have a bigger, wider spread, softer light for your subject. Now, for the purpose of this fashion video, because we wanted to go a little bit softer, we wanted to go a little bit more sensual, we actually wanted to use a big diffusion to make sure we had nice, even, soft light. Now, I put it right beside the window because if the light was going to change, if the sun was going to change direction, which it did a couple times on the shoot, at least there was some consistency coming from the 300D on about 25 to 45% of its power, so it was just bright enough to light up my subject, but also not be overpowering or overbearing. What I was gonna get was a V-flat setup, and now I found that to be really expensive for what it was, so I actually bought very big 5-in-1 reflectors or bounces or negative fills. So I actually put one on the white sheet to act as a little bit of a bounce, so as the light is kind of spilling in from everywhere, because there wasn't any sort of grid on that scrim, I was getting a little bit of return on the one side of Sid's face to make sure the light was nice and even. I wouldn't have gone with negative fill if I wanted to go with a more moodier setup, but because I wanted to keep things pretty even and pretty soft, I went with a white bounce instead. I forgot to mention some of the settings. Now, usually I would recommend going 24 frames a second for most things you're gonna shoot, but for the style of this video and the reason why I went with 60 frames is because we knew we were gonna slow down everything. Everything was supposed to be kind of a slower, more fashion type of look, so I went with 60 frames a second as my base in terms of my frame rate, and then I also went to 120 for certain shots as well. And it created some really great results while I was in post and I was editing things like that. Because we wanted to have more slower or more kind of like softer feel to the particular video with the track as well, 60 frames made the most amount of sense. Going in 24 frames a second didn't make a ton of sense for this video, so this is one of the few times that I almost shot exclusively in slow motion. So we're gonna break down 3 techniques that I shot this video with and 3 things that I did during this particular shoot. So the first thing is that top down push in or push out of Sid while like she's lying back on the bed of roses. Now, the way that we did this shot is pretty simple. We didn't use a ladder, we didn't have a slider. I only had this like small little couple foot step ladder, and I literally just stood on top of it and I took my gimbal, pointed it all the way down. I put in 60 frames a second so you wouldn't see a lot of that shake or a lot of that movement if there was a little bit of a micro jitter there, and I just moved the camera up and down as I was doing it. What you do when you slow that down is it kind of looks like that jib movement going up and down, and when it's in slow motion it looks pretty cool. So you do get that kind of feeling where like you might have been up on a ceiling and the camera slowly pointing down on your particular subject. Now back onto that shoot as well, there's another shot where you actually see Sid holding the pedals in her hand, but there's a bunch of pedals falling around her. Now, in the edit, you'll see somebody holding pedals and pedals falling around them, but what actually happened is we had 2 people, the hair and makeup artist, and we actually had the PA as well, dropping in pedals on either side. Now, when you're in post and you're shooting 120 frames a second, especially if you're shooting in 4K, which I recommend in shoots like these, I just cropped in so you couldn't see them, so all you saw was the things falling in the background. There wasn't a giant bag overhead, there was literally just 2 people with a handful of pedals dropping it on Sid, and in slow motion it looks awesome. Another variable example in this particular shoot, and you'll probably find this as you move on in your career, is that you're gonna work with other people. So Emma was actually the commercial photographer on this shoot. She also did a lot of the storyboarding and directing as well, but we had to figure out a way that I can get my video clips in and she could also get her photos in at the same time. So what we basically did was this. It was kind of like an assembly line where she would take photo at a certain angle and I would be standing right behind her. The second that she was done, she'd move out of the way and I would fly in with my gimbal, get my shots, and then I would come out. And then as I came out, she came back in. A lot of the lighting and the situation that we were in, a lot of the angles were pretty much the same. So you're gonna see kind of in the final edits and whenever this video comes out, whenever this project comes out, that a lot of the angles that are in the video are also in the photos as well. And we were looking for that. We wanted to get some stills as well as the same angle in some videos. So you have a little bit of movement to match the images that we're gonna be providing. So what I ended up doing is just creating some sort of a assembly line, whereas one person finishes shooting, the other person gets their shots in, and then you switch. Now, finding this kind of workflow with other creators is a little bit tough at first because you don't want to be stepping over each other, you don't want to get in each other's shots, you don't want to get in each other's way, but having a situation where as soon as one person's done, the other person jumps in and you work in that tandem is a really good way to make sure you get the most amount of content for the projects you have, especially when you're on your time crunch. We only had about 2 hours to actually shoot this particular project. Now, that is pretty much the synopsis of this particular project. I want to talk more about these, but I also want to go into what things I would change. I'm not a perfect DP, I'm not a perfect camera person, I'm not a perfect filmmaker, and there's things that I would change about every single project that I've ever done, and I want to be able to talk about those things so you don't make the same mistakes that I did. The first mistake that I made is I didn't bring enough light. What ended up happening during the shoot is the sun and the cloud kept changing, and even though I had a 300D on a scrim, you'd still get darker backgrounds because all of that sunlight wasn't bouncing off the walls and making everything even. So there's a couple shots where the background's a little bit dark and it throws you off a little bit in the final edit, and I know that because when I'm editing it, I could tell that the background is very, very dark. And when I try to brighten it up, it doesn't look as good as if the sun was just there naturally. The things I would recommend is if you're gonna bring a key light, make sure you also bring something to light up the background as well. In my head, I thought that it was gonna be nice, even light, and everything was gonna be gravy, so I actually only brought some reflectors and one big light. That was a mistake, and I wish I had brought a second light just to light up the background in case that happens again. The second thing is set dressing. Now, we were moving a lot of things, a lot of photo, there's a lot of lights going on, there was stands in places, the room was very, very small. So having to move things around and move equipment around or other things in the background that might be distracting was a little bit tough. Now I'm finding ways how I could edit some of those things out, or I can choose cuts that don't have it as badly in it, but there are some clips that I found that have equipment that's in it that's not part of the video. I would say if you can and you could afford it, or if you're just paying better attention, especially when you don't have a time crunch, is make sure you move everything before you take your shot. We were working really, really quickly, so I had to get shots in very, very fast. So, and I being human, I missed a couple things that might have been in the background. So now when I'm editing, I might not be able to get as much of a shot as I want to because I now have to mitigate some of the things that are in the background that shouldn't be there. So what I would recommend to you is that if you have somebody that's dressing your set, or you have someone like a PI on set, first of all, check your monitor first when you take your first shot, find out what things need to be moved, and then move them. All right, that's it for the video. I have not made one of these in about 2 weeks, and there's a reason for that. We were actually in Miami, Florida, shooting with a company that you guys know, and I'm gonna break that down in a little bit because they have a Black Friday sale coming soon. So we'll talk about that in a later video. But if you like this content, you wanna see more, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, do all of those fun things. And if you want to know more about my workflow and process when creating video, leave a comment down below and I'll be able to get back in another video another time. This has been KY Not Kylie Creative, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.